Whose economic plan is better for America? That of Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that you all know brings you the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. My co-host is Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another round.
Good to be here with you and our viewers and listeners.
All right, Richard, so we're on the eve of the much ballyhooed presidential election. I thought we ought to address it one more time. Europeans sometimes ask, Richard, why the presidential elections in America are so long. And my hunch is it's because Americans love that long period of time in which the new elected ruler is nice to them, promising them things, favors, and catering to them. But everybody knows that the day after the election, the hangover sets in, and the roles are now reversed. The ruler is the ruler, and he's the master of the welfare warfare state, managed economy, national security state, drug war, immigration controls, the whole apparatus. He's now in charge, and that we're relegated back to our lives as serfs whose mission in life is to serve the welfare warfare state, to work hard, to send our money to Washington to sustain their activities. So I figured, though, we ought to at least discuss the plans of both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump right before the election, specifically with respect to economics, since you're an economics professor and I've had a long time interest in economics. The Wall Street Journal just recently came out with an article comparing the basics of their plans and asking people for what the reactions are. So let me just summarize what the article said. All right, the article starts out with the fact that everybody's concerned about high prices. The grocery store prices, the gasoline prices, the prices of cars, the prices of everything across the board have soared. Okay, now we can call that price inflation. A lot of people refer to that inflation in those kind of terms. I think from an Austrian perspective, we wouldn't do that. We refer to inflation as the expansion of the money supply or inflation of the money supply by the Federal Reserve. But let's go along with that. They're concerned about price inflation, high prices across the board. So the article summarizes Harris's plan to deal with the economy, and as she's going to crack down on price gouging. She's going to enact laws that punish people that gouge people with higher prices. So essentially a price control. And then she's also promising $25,000 to anybody that's buying a home for the first time. So there we are, in the run up to the campaign. People love it because they're being promised a lot of goodies here. $25,000, boy, to help me buy a home, new home. That's fantastic. And then she's also taking a page out of the Republicans. She's promising tax credits to boost production in certain parts of the economy, clean energy, stuff like that. All right, so those are the basics of her plan for managing the economy.
Can you hold on a second? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you put it on pause for a second?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Evelyn. How are you? I was wondering if you had a minute for some academic advising.
Yes, but I need about 20 minutes.
Yes, sir. Come back in about 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes or so.
Yes, sir. I can
Okay,
do that.
thank you. Sorry.
That's all right.
It's a student, so let's try to do this in our sort of time framework because I got to meet with the student unscheduled.
All right. Well, I think we're still recording, so let's just keep going.
Bart can do whatever he has to do. Okay.
All right. So then you've got Trump's plan, and of course everybody knows Trump's plan. He's going to raise tariffs, which are really just a sales tax on imported goods. There's going to be trade wars. You recall the last time he was president, he started a vicious trade war with China that ended up bankrupting countless American farmers that then he put on welfare. And then, of course, standard Republican strategy. You've got tax cuts that he's promising. Let me just begin this by saying, notice that the assumption here is that the president should be managing the economy, that we're electing a manager of the economy, a central planner. And it's just so interesting how hardly anyone questions this. It's just becoming an ingrained part of American life that we're electing a central planner, a person that's going to deal with the problems we have in the economy. And the ridiculous aspect of this is reflected in the journal article. Here they have rising prices across the board, which, as we as Austrian economists, free market economists know, is rooted in the Federal Reserve, the central bank. That's where the expansion of the money supply takes place. That's what debases the currency. They've debased the currency for 100 years, and reflected by ever increasing prices or a diminution in the purchasing power of people's money. But notice that in these economic plans, there's no talk about the Federal Reserve. Neither Trump or Harris even mentions them. It's like, oh no, we're going to put price controls on, or we're going to put tariffs on, taxes on. And then you've got the other problem of out of control spending. They're now estimating that the deficit's going to be $2 trillion, which means $2 trillion added on to the $35 trillion already on the books as far as the federal government's debt is concerned. And so they're both talking about cutting taxes, but never cutting spending. You don't see them saying, oh, we need to get rid of Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or education grants or farm subsidies. And you certainly don't see them talking about getting rid of the national security state, Pentagon, CIA, NSA, all the foreign aid to Israel, Ukraine, and all the rest of the countries. They don't want to cut anything except maybe aid to the arts with the Republicans, or food stamps or something like that. But they want to cut taxes, which of course then just increases the deficit, the amount of money they're collecting versus the amount of money they're spending. So all of this is folly, Richard, as far as I'm concerned, that regardless of who's going to be elected president, from a libertarian standpoint and a freedom standpoint, we're looking at some really bad times ahead over the next 4 years. What do you think?
Well, basically, the underlying problem is, which you've been alluding to, is that both of them believe in the ideology and the politics of the interventionist welfare state. They both presume that it's the duty and responsibility of the government to redistribute, regulate, control, and plan people's futures. All their differences concern is the particular intervention and redistributions they will undertake, and for whose benefit, at whose cost. Kamala has emphasized, as you were saying, these price controls, which basically undermines and destroys the functioning of the price system to both coordinate markets and provide information about what consumers want, the intensity of their demands, what suppliers could offer on the market, at what market-based opportunity costs, given the scarcity of resources, the value of the resources here as opposed to there, and therefore the rational use of them to satisfy the wants of the consuming public. Then her talk about redirecting wealth towards those who are interested in buying a home basically means some are to be privileged to have money for a down payment, where others are going to have to bear the burden of having less money for their own purposes to fund it, and whether it's coming through taxes or borrowed funds. And there's also the unintended consequences, the secondary effects, that if you suddenly give everybody these thousands upon thousands of dollars so they can have cash to put down as a down payment, what then is going to happen to the demand for housing? It'll rise dramatically. And the very concerns that she expresses about the high cost of buying a home for a new family is going to be exacerbated. And given the the zoning laws and the other environmental regulations, and therefore the restrictions on the ability to expand housing on a market, means that it's going to become even a worse housing market. And then finally, she too believes in tariffs. She has said in these interviews that when asked, are there anything that Joe Biden has done as president that you would want to do differently? No, I agree with everything he's done. I'm on his team, which means they basically have the same views of tariffs and restrictions on imports, some of which they actually inherited from Trump's administration. It didn't change. So then when you get to Trump, he just wants to do it in a different direction. He wants tariffs too. He might want to focus them on different countries than Harris might focus on. He's also interested in micromanaging the direction of industry in America. That's his very purpose of giving these tax breaks and subsidies and so on, to draw industries into those sectors of the economy that he says he knows is what will make America great. The idea that the market should determine what goods are wanted, the most cost-efficient locations and forms of supplies, either from domestic production or through foreign trade, does not enter in his mind. He's basically an industrial and trade central planner. And then, as you pointed out, and which is crucial to this, is that neither one of them even mentions the notion of cuts in government spending. All they see is the way of staying in power and buying votes and establish their legacy as a great president is to spend, 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 elect, elect, elect. And of course, that's a phrase that became famous from one of Franklin Roosevelt's advisors in the 1930s. This means that the spending will go on, the deficits will continue in the large amounts of $2 trillion, the debt will accumulate, and at some point this is going to create a huge financial crisis, at which point the can no longer be kicked down the road. And matching this are the type of foreign policy issues you talked about. Neither of them really talks about reducing America's presence around the world. And I know Trump has talked about this, but this is basically his idea of, the art of the deal. How can I get the European partners to pay more or to be more flexible on the trade deals concerning imports and exports that I want? Though, to be honest, the Europeans have been such on a gravy train of American subsidization of NATO defense for so long that if you read the Financial Times, for example, the Europeans are going crazy. They're already holding sessions on how will we deal when Trump doesn't want to spend the money to protect us, when Trump doesn't want to give the money to Ukraine, and we're going to have to cough up the money if we want to keep supporting Ukraine. I mean, so they're in panic mode. Not intervention panic mode, but the fact that they're going to have to shoulder more of what the American taxpayer has been taking care of for them for a long time. So basically, there is no difference between the two of them, other than the groups they want to support, the enemies they want to oppose, and the ways they're going to take our tax money and borrowed sums to basically feed the special interest groups that form the coalition that they view as their sources of power. And as far as liberty is concerned, about a free society is concerned, about a free market is concerned, we are unfortunately in a great counter-revolution against the free society globally, and not just in the United States, but we're here in the United States, and therefore we should see it more clearly and be concerned more about it.
Yeah, it really is stunning to me that anybody would still be calling for price controls as a way to deal with the debasement of the currency that is manifested in terms of the higher prices that money buys, of the things that money buys. I mean, it's just shocking to me that she has economic advisors that would tell her this is a sound position. We know what price controls do. I mean, those of us at least lived during the times of the long lines at the service stations back in the 70s. I mean, this is what happens when you place a price control on an item. You get shortages because the person that's selling the item can't make a profit. He's still paying rising prices for the things that get that product to his grocery store. He's got to pay higher salaries and higher costs of everything, transportation and so forth. And so he's going to sell this item at a loss. It ain't going to happen. He's going to hoard it, and then that's when you get the government involved in anti-hoarding laws and so forth. I mean, this is just ludicrous. Long lines, bare shelves. I mean, that's what we're looking at if we get this anti-gouging national law. This isn't just a gouging law during a hurricane. This is price controls across the board of the things we buy at grocery stores. You're looking at shortages across the board. It's amazing to me.
The thing here is they don't care. You see, you're saying is this what Harris's advisors are feeding her? Are the advisors that ignorant? Well, I imagine that some are, but the deeper perversity of this is that I assume that there are members of her staff, those who know some basic economics, may even be economists themselves. They know that this is a counterproductive and disastrous policy to distort the price mechanism and create shortages of this type and the other, that will exacerbate whatever the original disaster problem was, like with the hurricane. But the fact is that they don't care. You know, if we want to talk in like Frederick Bastiat's terms, what is seen and what is unseen, they may know some of the unseen, but they don't care. They're concerned with next week's presidential vote. They're only concerned with what's seen. If you elect me, I'll see that the prices of the essential items you need will not go up. If you elect me, I'll give you the money for the down payment of the house you want as a young couple. If you elect me, I will give you the redistributive funds so you can have free education, so you can have more food stamps, so you can have subsidized this and financially covered that. Here's the money. Just vote for me now, next Tuesday. That's all they care about. And that's what makes them more dangerous. When many of them do know either all or at least some of the unintended secondary consequences of these short-run policies, but don't care. They don't care about tomorrow. It's like the French phrase leading up to the French Revolution, après nous déluge, after us the flood. They're just concerned with today. And that's what makes them especially dangerous. And Trump is no different. I'm sure that there are people who try to talk to Trump and explain, I know you're trying to make America great again, Donald, but these tariffs are not going to help you. In fact, you're going to make America's hope for being a better and more prosperous country further away by imposing these tariffs. But it doesn't matter. It's what happens in the next election, which is a week away. And that's all they care about.
Yeah, and they're playing to the masses that don't know any better. I mean, if you take the average person that doesn't know anything about economics and he's gotten his education in a public school somewhere, which is most Americans, they just see those higher prices. And now this politician is saying, I'm going to put a price control because those people that are raising your prices are bad people, and I'm going to stop them from raising prices. The average person says, well, that's fantastic. How else to stop these rising prices except to order them to put them in jail if they keep raising their prices? So they don't know any better, and that's who they're playing to. I mean, they know that they're not going to fool us.
Yeah, think of the quack doctor who has a patient who comes to him with a high fever, which must be a symptom of some serious underlying ailment. And the patient says, my fever is getting higher and higher and higher. Doc, what's wrong? Well, help me, help me. And he says, don't worry. I'm putting my finger over the mercury in the thermometer. It's not going to record any higher temperature. You're going to be okay. I mean, that's the same logic.
Yeah, and you've got a good point about the seen and unseen. We've talked about that, but people forget about that when the government gives $25,000 to someone, they have to first take the $25,000 from someone else. And that's the unseen, that person has $25,000 less to save for his retirement, for his children's education, for a new car, whatever. And in that sector of the economy, there's going to be an adverse impact. But you don't see that. And so they get away with this. And here's another thing to consider, Richard. Remember the housing crisis, where they encouraged all those poor people with subprime loans to buy houses that really had no business buying homes financially. And that's the way the market ferrets it out. If you don't have enough of a down payment, the market is saying you should not be buying a house here. But they thought, oh, no, subprime loans are now $25,000 free down payment money. All of a sudden, down the line, these poor people that have been induced and encouraged to buy a home, all of a sudden start defaulting. And they have their homes taken away from them. You have the massive crisis again. Same kind of interventionist nonsense. And you know, the points you make about Trump's tariffs are right on. I mean, let's not forget that this is a regressive tax, and it hurts the poor. So here you have the poor that are paying these exorbitant prices in grocery stores, service stations, clothing, whatever, cars, used cars. And now Trump says, let me add insult to injury, fuel on the fire. I'm going to tax the poor even more because that's what it is. It's a sales tax. It's a regressive tax. It falls most heavily on poor people. But he plays to the masses. Oh no, the Chinese are going to be paying for this, sort of like the Mexican government's going to be paying for his Berlin Wall. Remember that one? And so he gets this notion in people's mind that this is just all going to be free because they over there are going to pay for it. Well, they over there don't pay for it. This is a tax on imported goods, which makes things more expensive, especially for poor people. Makes it more expensive for everybody. And not to mention the fact that there's retaliation. Whenever you raise these tariffs, like with China, when he started that trade war and he says, oh, I'm very good at trade wars. I'm going to win the trade war. And China says, okay, and stops buying wheat from American farmers and other things from American farmers. Massive bankruptcies, Richard. I mean, these farmers went from one day to the next where they were selling tons of their crops to the Chinese. All of a sudden, we're selling virtually nothing, forcing them into bankruptcy. So what does Trump do? He uses government largesse, like this $25,000 grant, says, oh, let me help the farmers out, and puts them on welfare. Now, how good is that? To be putting people on welfare and saying, look what a good person I am, after you've destroyed their ability to manage for themselves. Here they are, independent, providing a good that other people around the world want to buy, and now they're just dependent on the government. And Trump is saying, look what a good thing I've done. I've put people dependent on the government.
No,
And then,
see, the thing is that this is the danger of the short run, because he says he's going to impose tariffs, just following up what you just said, and the Chinese are going to pay for it, and it'll have a negative effect on us. And then when you end up with the American farmers losing business, he says, don't worry. And if you're a farmer who's threatened with a loss of revenues, being in the loss column, the inability to meet your loans on your property, and therefore the loss of your farm, and he says, don't worry, these are forces outside. These are nefarious forces that this is their evil ways, but I'm going to protect you and keep you afloat because you're the backbone. You're the people I'm concerned with. Many people, again, just concerned with their immediate circumstance, say, thank goodness Trump saved us after these bad people abroad destroyed our export market.
yeah. Well, we've got, I send out a report periodically, regularly to our Freedom Club, which consists of our donors who give us $250 or more. And yesterday in my report, it was very short, and I said it was going to be a short report. I said, we can't get all embroiled in this presidential race if we want a free society, because neither one of these people which is going to bring us the free society. And so what do we do as libertarians? Well, we continue to present the principal case for liberty. What is it that we need to do? Because it's not a personal problem. It's not a Kamala versus Donald Trump problem. It's a system problem. You've got a welfare state system. You've got a national security state system. You've got a massive redistribution problem, a managed economy system. What we have to do is keep raising people's vision to a higher level. What does it mean to be free? What is it that we need to do to achieve a genuinely free society? One based on genuine libertarian principles. That is the dismantling of the welfare state, the restoration of a limited government republic, a restoration of a society based on free markets and voluntary charity, the dismantling of the whole national security state, foreign interventionism. In other words, taking the best of the founding principles of this country, reestablishing those sound founding principles, and then building on them. That's where the hope for the future of this country lies, not in any particular presidential candidate, especially those that are calling for more statism, but rather in a vision for what we need to do to get this country back on the right track, the track toward freedom, peace, prosperity, and harmony with the people of the world.
Yeah, if I can sort of pick up on that theme. Um, Back in the 1950s in England, there was a very successful British businessman who had read Hayek's Road to Serfdom during the war. And now in the post-war period, he had been very successful as a farmer. And he approached Hayek and asked Hayek, well, I've made a fortune in farming. I care about freedom. Your own book, Road to Serfdom, greatly inspired me. Should I invest my money in politics to try to get the right people in office to save England from moving down these wrong directions? And Hayek's response was no. Because the point is that today's politics reflects the ideological and political currents that emerged 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it's like a pipeline. If you want something different to come out the end, you have to start putting something different, new at the beginning of the pipeline. And that's ideas. And he said, if you want to really influence the direction of this country, Great Britain at that time, to see that in the future, it may return hopefully to a more free market, limited government, individual society, then you have to focus on spreading the right ideas. And while however frustrating, do not give as much attention. If you even can, more or less ignore the politics of today, because you cannot affect tomorrow's election, but you can affect the climate of opinion, the spirit of the times, the ideological environment in which in the future, different political policies may come out at the end of the idea pipeline. And he told
I
this
think you were,
fellow, huh?
go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And he told this fellow, you should put your money into a think tank. And this fellow gave the money that became the Institute of Economic Affairs, IEA, in London. And over the decades, they ended up greatly influencing the climate of opinion. Now, is the climate of opinion free market in England? No. But compared to the very old-fashioned liberal, collectivist Labour Party socialist view, there emerged in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, because of that pipeline of ideas with the founding of the Institute of Economic Affairs in the 1960s, a change of at least some of the opinion. Now, she's a very controversial figure, but the fact is that Margaret Thatcher came into office and dropped on the table of a cabinet meeting one of Hayek's books and said, this is what we're about. This is what we should want as our ideal. And how did she come to these ideas? Through the climate of opinion that was changing due to IEA. Now, that is the importance of ideas. Now, your argument that you're saying that what's important is to make the case for liberty in spite of what politics are doing today, so that you can change the climate of opinion, the spirit of the times, the ideological environment, so that sometime in the future, there will be enough of a catalyst of people and a shifting of the terms of the debate so that freedom can have a chance in the future. And that's what's important, not the next presidential election, which is just around the corner. It's making sure that looking between now and future years, we can change opinion so that we don't have to feel that there's no choice. Not because one party is better than another, but the climate of opinion has changed so much that whoever is running for office will have to reflect a freedom perspective rather than the interventionist welfare state perspective, because there are enough people who are now saying, why should the government be doing this? Why should my money be taken to serve the political ends of others? Why shouldn't I be free to trade and associate and interact with whomever I want peacefully and for mutual gain? Why are these people doing this? I want those kind of people in office to dismantle the state, not make it grow. And if that climate of opinion changes, then politics will follow.
Okay, and I think the guy you were referring to is Anthony Fisher.
Correct.
For IEA. But you know, when you were talking, you reminded me of a group that was really a big inspiration for me, Richard. When I first discovered libertarianism, I was practicing law. I didn't know much about the libertarian movement, but I discovered a little group called, I think is the Council for Competitive Economy.
Yes.
which was a group of businessmen who held a very principled libertarian view.
Right.
And I would get their newsletter every month, and I mean, these were people that held our views, the
Yes.
principled, uncompromised view, and they were businessmen. And it was just such an inspiration for me. One of them was Bill Law, as you know, from Milwaukee with Cudahy Tanning Company. I think they may be now the Law Tanning Company, but Bill took the position as we oppose all protectionist tariffs, even though the
Right.
Japanese were eating his lunch competitively with his leather business.
Right.
And he even published an article in the Wall Street Journal says, I don't want protection. If I can't outcompete, then that's just tough. And that was this group of businessmen. Today, businessmen, including libertarian ones, are all embroiled of, oh, we got to elect Republicans, we got to elect Donald Trump, we got to get involved in the political process. And it's very difficult to find the type of people that were involved in that organization. I think it was run by a guy named Rich Wilkie.
Yes,
And
that's correct.
they were heroic, Richard, just heroic. And then unfortunately, they went out of existence somewhere, I think, in the early 80s. You
But
remember them.
That's the change in opinion. Now, I think most viewers and listeners have heard of the company Procter and Gamble. They put out a lot of consumer products, but they, in the 1940s, sponsored research people to deal with the public issues of the day. They even published little pamphlets. One of their authors was a person that most viewers will not be familiar with, but his name was Michael Halprin. And he was a colleague and a friend of Mises and Hayek and others like that. He was writing policy papers against government intervention for Procter and Gamble because the people at that time were principled to defend this, and that's what they wanted.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Well, let me just tell one final story. You know, as both of us have been heavily influenced by Leonard Reed, who founded the Foundation for Economic Education. But there's that great story where they were at a board meeting for fee, and the wealthy guy, J. Howard Pugh, who was on the board, big donor to fee, said something to the effect, Leonard, if fee doesn't change its policy against tariffs and protectionism and continue staying in favor of free trade, I'm going to resign from the board, and presumably take his donations with him. And Leonard's response was, we will miss you. It was heroic.
Pugh backed down, by the way. He backed down.
Yeah, I think he left temporarily and then came back.
Right.
And it was heroic. I mean, that's the type of thing we need in this country, Richard, to get this country back on the right track.
Absolutely.
All right. On that note, we'll wrap things up. Richard, as always, enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you next week after the election, Richard.
Until next time.